Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. Today we'll be continuing our investigation of the Gateless Barrier, Case 15. Dongshan's 60 Blows. Dongshan came to see Yunmen. Yunmen asked him, "Where have you come from?" Dongshan said, "At Chadu." Yunmen said, Where were you during the summer?" Dongshan said, "At Baoji Monastery in Hunan." Yunmen said, "When did you leave there?" Dongshan said, "August 25th. Yunmen said, "I spare you 60 blows." The next day, Dongshan came again and said, "Yesterday you said you spared me 60 blows. I don't know where I was at fault." Yunmen said, "You rice bag! Do you go about in such a way, now west of the river, now south of the lake?" With this, Dongshan had a great realization. Wumen says, if Yunmen had provided the essential fodder at that time and awakened in Dongshan the one path of vitality, then Yunmen's house would not have been vacated. All night in the ocean of yes and no, Dongshan struggled to the ultimate. As soon as dawn broke, he went again to Yunmen, who explained everything in detail. Even though Dongshan had realization, he was not yet brilliant. Now let me ask you, should Dongshan have been given 60 blows or not? If you say yes, then grasses, bushes, and trees should all be beaten. If you say no, then you make Yunmen a liar. If you can be clear about this, then you and Dongshan intimately share a breath. Wumen's verse says, "The lion teaches its cub the secret art, pushing it over a cliff out of parental dotage. The cub, intending to advance, springs again quickly. Unexpectedly, it is flattened out again. The first arrow strikes lightly, but the second one goes deep." Please make yourself at ease. Try not to be so easy you break dishes. This case, it's very interesting even to read. This is an internal translation. This is my own translation that compiled from a number of different sources. And whenever I get to this case, it's always really problematic because there's a bunch of stuff in it that just it has to be unpacked and unpacked and unpacked and unpacked. So the first thing is, for those of you who have been coming on Sundays, Yunmen is the student of Shui Feng, who is, from a couple of cases ago, Deshan one day descended into the dining hall, bowls in hand. Shui Feng asked him, "Where are you going with your bowls in hand, old teacher? The bell has not rung and the drum has not sounded." You remember this case? Okay. So Shui Feng is Yunmen's teacher. So once we start getting into the cases, we start to, when we start engaging in koan practice, we have to move outside of the studying sort of mindset. I think when we look at cases, it's really easy to sort of get into this sort of intellectual learning mindset where we're trying to figure out what's going on in a case. And what we have to do is get outside of that mindset, and we have to get into the koans. The more I practice koans, the more I investigate and give talks about these koans, the more that these old guys become family for me. They become old friends. And when I'm talking about them, when I'm giving talks about them, there isn't a single one of them that stands alone, that's independent in these stories. Each of them carry the characteristics of their particular line. And when we're talking about a person who's being represented in a case, it's always helpful to understand who their relations are and what the turning moment or the pivotal parts of the cases that their teachers or their disciples are in, because we can often see reflections of their teachers, reflections of their disciples, in their disciples, of those pivotal moments. So I'm just going to start with the case. Dongshan came to see Yunmen. Yunmen asked him, "Where have you come from?" So one of the things that we learn about Zen teachers is that the idea of mondo, which is Dharma combat. So any time that you're coming, or traditionally, any time that you were coming to a monastery as a monk, the moment that you set foot, it actually doesn't even require that you set foot into the temple grounds. If you, there's a reason that we sort of wear these clothes, and that's so that other people who are wearing these kinds of clothes know what's coming. And so when this particular monk comes to Yunmen's monastery and enters in and is met by the master of the monastery, and he asks a question, "Where have you come from?" There's always a bunch of different ways that we can answer questions. And for example, a great example, I think, is, on a Tuesday evening, one of the questions that's always asked in the tea circle is, "What brought you to practice tonight?" And there's always different ways to answer the question. From the sort of skipping off the surface kind of, I've heard, the 27 bus is what brought me here. Completely literal. The 27 bus is what brought me here tonight. Or another way of answering it just a little bit deeper is, well, my friend invited me So I thought I would come and check it out a little bit deeper. But more and more as we reflect on that question, we can go quite deep with this simple question of what brings you here tonight? What underneath it all is motivating you to investigate the practice of Zen meditation? What's bringing you here to sit in this quiet room together with other people to investigate the breath? What is it down at the root? And that question is not an easy one to grapple with or to be clear about, and certainly not to talk about or even confront, particularly in a group full of people who might be strangers. Occasionally, someone, whether they're a long-time member or whether they're a total newcomer, tears themselves in half and actually responds to that question. And the impact on the whole environment, in my experience, is powerful. When somebody actually responds in that way, it's very difficult for the person immediately after them to say the number 27 bus. Because that sincerity, that intentionality, that commitment to respond from your guts to a simple question is the essence of our practice. It's easy to just fly off the cuff and give a superficial answer. So when we see this, we have Yunmen, and we try to picture this Zen master, Yunmen, who has been training for his whole life. He's committed his whole life to providing this practice and has seen countless monks come through the door. Innumerable people coming to investigate Zen practice. So when he faces this new arrival and says, "Oh, where have you come from?" What are the chances that he's really concerned about the town that the person is coming from? Almost zero. Right away, he wants to assess actually where this monk is coming from, where he's at. So he says, "Where have you come from?" And so Dongshan says, Chadu, gives him the name of the village that he grew up in. The question seemingly goes right over his head. But sometimes in Dharma combat, a really skillful player will respond with a very straightforward answer to sort of set up the questioner, to set up the master. So at this point, the master, it's one or the other. Either this guy's, not quite sure what's going on, or he's really skillful. So the master has to press on. I guess one thing that we should say is, in the notes to this case, it points out that Chadu, from the place Chadu that he names, from where Yunmen is really far. It's like across the country of China, and this is in about the year 900. So it's a pretty significant journey. Yunmen says, "Where were you during the summer?" So this is another question which can come out like, where did you spend? And when he says something like this, "Where were you during the summer?" he's asking the superficial question of where did you train, or where were you practicing during the last season, training season. But what's important in this question is this first part, where were you? He keeps poking. Where have you come from? These are questions about the very nature of self. I am. And he's prodding this Dongshan with these questions. Where have you come from? When we don't take that question literally, it's a very slippery and deep question. Where were you during the summer? I can say, where were you yesterday? Where were you when you were a child? Where were you? Where is the you before you were born? This is the same question that he's posing here. Where were you during the summer? And Dongshan says, at Baoji Monastery in Hunan. Uh-oh. So Yunmen, I think, is firming up here. You've given him, again, a testing question. He's testing the depths of the water. And so far, Dongshan is staying completely in the shallows, not playing ball, not playing. And so Yunmen asks a final question. When did you leave there? When did you leave? When did you depart? And Dongshan says August 25th. Wow, gives him the exact date. So the next line is really interesting. It says, Yunmen said, I spare you 60 blows. And I have to take some time to talk about this because it's translated variously. And my suspicion is that this is a very modern translation. I spare you 60 blows. Because the more frequent translation of this is, I give you 60 blows. And it refers to an actual beating. And the translation is bad because it says, I give you, the translation is, I give you 3 20s blows. So it's like 3 beatings. I'm going to give you 3 beatings. When I was training, Sasaki Roshi took his stick to emphasize this point because we blow by this very easily. And he says, I give you 60 blows. I think that's 60. Yunmen was famous for his stick. So I want to just really emphasize that this is not a cute situation. The other thing we have to really look at is that this is in a very different culture at a very different time. Most, I think, children growing up in rural China at this time were not unaccustomed to physical violence in the family or physical discipline. We have an idea of Buddhist monks as being, very peaceful. and very kind and very loving. But there's lots of examples in our texts where we see these strange things with shouts and sticks and all this kind of stuff. And it really makes a rift in our mind between what we think of as compassion and kindness and what's being represented. And a big part of that difference is a cultural one. I remember reading a book on monastic code that talked about in the old days, we didn't have electricity in monasteries. We had oil lamps. And so, for example, the shoji's role would be to make sure that, passageways were lit and everyone was safe and people had enough light to read by. But, if they were out of the room, it was the expectation that the shoji would be putting things out. So A, the wooden temple building didn't burn down, and B, the oil, which was expensive, wasn't being wasted, because at that time all resources in the monastery were supplied by donors, and it was a responsibility of the monks to ensure that they were being responsible with the things that they were given and not being wasteful. And so if a shoji, absent-mindedly left a light burning in the hallway, it was the responsibility of the ino to take them out and cane them. Oh my God! I think the officers' meetings afterwards are much kinder now. I don't know. I think I'd have a hard time with Soshin saying, "Okay, what I saw today, 10 for Matt and 5 for Doshu." I think I'd be hard pressed. But in those days, the idea or the reasoning behind it is you get a lot less mistakes that way. The shoji is not going to forget to turn the lights off if he's still stinging from the last time. This is the reasoning behind it. And so in that way, the idea of a stiff punishment or a stiff correction, not just with your mouth, but with the stick. And ceremonially today in Zen, whenever there's a ceremony, you'll see all these officers have these different kinds of sticks. And nowadays they're just ornaments, of office. But in those days, they were used. And the idea is that we save time, we save energy, and we learn very quickly through this method of toughness, or this method of physical discipline. Therefore, in that saving of time, in that saving of speech, in that clarity of correction, we are being compassionate. We're saving time so that that person can awaken to their mistakes or their shortcomings. Now, I need to be very clear and say, I'm not condoning that. We live in a very different culture, and the context of our environment is a huge part of how we go about working with one another. I can say that, this is the physical discipline that took place in these Chinese monasteries, but it's also very clear that cruelty was not accepted either. You couldn't just be a bully. These were responsibilities. And I think anybody who's carried the Keisaku in one of our retreats can really point to this. We think when we see the Keisaku, we always think about how, it's a bit scary to be receiving it, and you have to think about when you're going to ask for it and things. But we never really think about what it's like to be given a stick and told to help people by hitting them. That's a really challenging responsibility, a challenging task. So Yunmen sees this person who has come. If you're uncomfortable, please adjust your posture, make yourself comfortable. Yunmen sees this young monk who has apparently come a really long way So I think as a teacher, for me, if somebody turned up to practice here and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" Even if I was like, "Where are you from?" and he said like, "Germany," I might say, okay, he missed the serve, but geez, he's come a long way. So there must be something to this character. Either he's rich and crazy, or he's got something sort of burning. So Yunmen gives him this beating, a very serious beating, and sends him away. So obviously, judging by the story, either the monk is staying in the monastery and has been for, he's done his sort of initiation to be admitted into the monk's hall. So after this turning around, he's sent away. And what does that monk do? This is a really important question. And it reminds me of my own experience with going to the monastery. So if you'll indulge me, I'll tell this story. When I first started practicing Zen, I started on my own, and eventually Nikki and I moved across the country. We were boyfriend and girlfriend then, and we landed in Victoria. And part of my motivation for coming to Victoria, to British Columbia, was that I figured there was more Buddhism on the West Coast than there was in sort of suburban Toronto. And yeah, that's true. It still is true. But at the time, Victoria Zen Center was a very small place. It was 12 zabutons in a big sort of sawn-off fridge box with a bunch of zafus piled on top. And we met in a borrowed, rented space downtown on Johnson Street. And when I first came, I was really enthusiastic, young, early 20s, really enthusiastic about Zen. And when I came to Victoria, I was like, finally, I'll be able to practice with a real Zen center. But when I met the Victoria Zen Center, it was mostly 60 to 80-year-old ladies, and they wanted to do no more than sit once a week, for the 3 periods. Some of them were Christian ladies who just really liked the Zen form because it was less sort of ornate than the sort of available alternatives. So Nikki and I moved across the country together and got ourselves some work, but the sort of Zen bug kept digging away at me. I really wanted to practice Zen intensely, the way I'd read about in books and the way of these old monasteries. And at the time, my thinking was, I don't mind if a teacher's got to whack me with a stick 60 times in order for me to really get to the root of this. I don't care. So it kind of grew and festered and developed in me. And it got to the point where I was just completely convinced that what I needed to do was go and shave my head, become celibate, and become a monk. It was really burning away at me. And Nikki, I would talk to her about it, and Nikki got to the point where she got sick of hearing me talk about it, and she said, yes, you do. She said, because if you stay with me, then sometime when we're 50, you're going to look at me and tell me how I kept you away from doing the things that you were supposed to do, and I'm not going to have that. So either shut up or go do it. So I started looking around at places to go and do that. We'd been living together in an apartment on Pandora, And I arranged to go to Mount Baldy Zen Center. Originally, I was going to go to Zen Mountain Monastery in New York, but Eshin, who is the abbot of the Zen Center of Vancouver, and who was coming over supporting the Victoria Zen Center at that time, offered to cover my flight down with points, because I was working jobs that didn't pay a whole lot of money, and the flight and the training fees were a lot of money. So he offered to cover my flight if I wanted to go and practice with Sasaki Roshi. So I said, yeah, absolutely. Continued to save the money. I'd never been out of Canada before that. So Nikki and I split up. Well, we split up. I said, I'm going down to this monastery, and it is my intention to stay there for as long as it takes to get enlightened, or to whatever. I probably said to get enlightened. And so, I said, I don't want to have anything over you. I don't want to hold you back from having a life and going off and getting married and having children and all that, because I need to go and do this. And so she understood, and she let me go. So we moved out of our apartment, and Nikki moved into another place, and I moved down to Mount Baldy. And I was picked up at the airport and taken up the mountain and brought to this old Boy Scout camp on the side of the hill. And we'd sold everything that we owned. I owned nothing except the bags that I'd brought with me to Mount Baldy. This is it. So, having arrived there, arrived there late at night. One of the parting... No, I won't tell that story. The next morning came really early, and I started doing what's called Tango Ryo, which is you're not allowed into the Zendo until basically you've demonstrated that you can hack it. So you sit in the sutra hall with the Dentsu. You do basically the same schedule as the people who are in the Zendo. You eat with the people who are practicing in the Zendo, but it's just a way for them to sort of keep an eye on you to make sure that you're physically, mentally, emotionally prepared for practice. You don't meet the teacher yet or anything like that. They don't want to waste the teacher's time. At that time, he was 90 years old already. So they didn't really want to waste his time with people who weren't ready. So after 3 days of that, you go and you do shokenko with the Roshi. So there were 3 of us at that time, and we were taken up into the Roshi's interview room. And so it's very brief, just as it is here. You have a cup of tea, you have these Japanese sesame snacks. It's all very ritualized. You're given this whole lecture, you've got to watch the Roshi, and you get snacks, but if he puts his snacks down, you need to put your snacks in your sleeve, and it's very... So you go through the whole shokenko, then you go out into the Zendo, and you do the Zendo entering ceremony, much as we do here, and you're given a seat in the Zendo. And then you sit, and then you have your first sanzen interview with the Roshi. And there's many more people, usually 20 students at the time that I was there was pretty common, and 50 or 60 for Sesshin. So the first sanzen I had was in the evening with Sasaki Roshi. The bell rings and people run up the hill, and you go and you get into the sanzen waiting room, and you sit there and you wait, and then eventually your turn comes and you ring the bell. So you go into the interview room. So I come into the interview room, I do my prostrations, and I sit down in front of the Roshi, eager to begin my Zen career. And Sasaki Roshi took his stick. He has like a gnarly kind of stick, and he just threw it at me. He threw it on the ground in front of me. So I kind of, what do I do? What do I do? So I picked it up and I handed it back to him. And he took it and he threw it on the ground. So I picked it up again. And he looked at me again and he threw it on the ground again. So I picked it up and I handed it to him again. And then he just laughed. And he laughed like at me in a really just like, ha 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 ha. And then he rang the bell. Interview's over. And as I was turning, doing my bows, he said, "You're weak." And, oh my God. I went back to the Zendo shattered. I'd given up a relationship, and I'd given up my home, and I'd given up a job, and I'd given up absolutely everything to come and do this practice. And on my very first interview, I had just like got the gut punch. So that night I didn't sleep very much. What am I going to do? I'm obviously not cut out for this Zen stuff. I'm obviously completely deluded. How could I have done this to Nikki, and how could I have been so misguided? All this stuff came up. All the noise of my mind and my heart over the course of this night came up. What am I going to do? Am I going to run away? Maybe if I run across the road to the bar there, I can get a cab to the airport and just get out of here. Am I just going to give this up? Or am I going to go forward? And I don't even know what I did. Like, what were you supposed to do when this person threw? I don't know. So this whole big mess. The next day, when the wake-up bell rang, I was already awake. And so I put on my robe and went down to the Zendo. And the fundamental truth was that there was nowhere else for me to be. There was nothing else for me to do. And even though all of this stuff came up through the night, I still wanted to get to the bottom of it. I still had this fundamental question. I still didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I didn't know of a better place to figure that out than right here. And so we had the morning sutras. I think I cried through the whole thing, and then back to the Zendo for morning Sanzen. And when I walked into the interview room, Sasaki Roshi didn't say anything about the previous day. But it seemed like there was an acknowledgement, and a simple acknowledgement, that was made the moment I walked in. Just the fact that I was still there. This kid is serious. This kid wants to get to the bottom of this. So there's a part of me where I look back and think, wow, that was like one of the meanest things that was ever done to me. But on the other hand, it was something that was so completely clarifying about my purpose in life and what I wanted to do with it and what I was willing to face in order to engage in this practice. When I read this story, it's easy, this case, for us to look at it from a Western perspective. And I think that we often make the mistake of taking up our Zen practice from this very superficial perspective. And it's easy to, because we see it in our culture and in our society right now, everywhere. Mindfulness. Increase your productivity. Make better relationships with your family. Get better at the art that you're practicing. Become a more effective athlete. And sure, all of these things are true, but all of these things are coming from Chadu. Why? Why do you want to be a better athlete? Who is it that's becoming a better athlete? Who is it that's going to be more effective? Why is it that you can't sleep at night? What holds you back? What are you hanging on to that prevents loving, harmonious relationship? This is where Zen practice is pointing. And it's not a soft, way. Zen is often referred to as the direct pointing, the direct route. There's lots of ways up a mountain, it said. Zen is like, let's not screw around, let's go straight up. I don't care how steep it is, let's go straight up. So the next day, Dongshan comes again. After this beating, comes again. So we can even imagine that this is interview. The next day, after being whacked around in his interview, he comes in again. And he says, yesterday you said you spared me 60 blows or 3 beatings, or in another translation, yesterday you gave me 3 beatings. I don't know what I did wrong. Explain it to me. Yunmen says, you rice bag! Rice bag is like, at the time, it's sort of like the definition of something that's of no use. It's like a bag that's used to carry rice, but it's even today you can see something similar, like at a grocery market. Like it's got holes in it. It can't hold much. Like you couldn't put much in it. It's kind of like ratty. It's useless. So he's saying, you're useless. Like I even give you a problem for you to consider, and you come back and you're still useless. Do you go about in such a way, now west of the river, now south of the lake? So he's saying, you're wandering around looking for something. You're useless. Dongshan comes back kind of still pitying himself, or still looking for somebody to tell him he's good, or something to tell him he's doing it right, or someone to tell him how to do it. And Yunmen doesn't bend. Yunmen pushes him again and says, really? You're still asking me how to go about this? With this, Dongshan had a great realization. And it said that their relationship, Dongshan's relationship with Yunmen after this, blossomed. He realized that Yunmen wasn't going to do it for him, that he had to grasp this matter for himself. Okay, you rang the bell a long time ago, so I'm not going to spend too much more time today. We'll have to continue this next time. I guess what I'd like to say here is that this case is very important for really clarifying what we're doing in Zen practice and the kind of sobriety or commitment that we must approach our practice with. Sleeping better at night, reducing our blood pressure, increased productivity at work, greater awareness in our day-to-day activities. These are all effects of practice, but arguably they are side effects of practice. Our primary practice, our primary investigation is into the very nature of this thing that we call a self. It's an investigation into this activity of arising and dissolving. Who are we? Who are you? Before your parents were born, where did you come from? When we're ready to commit ourselves, when we're ready to really get down to this business, then we can say we're ready to practice Zen. We shouldn't feel bad if that's not where we're at. I think that everybody comes to practice. I was reading an article or something the other day that said everybody comes to practice for the wrong reason. All of us comes because there's some aspect of ourself that's dissatisfactory, some aspect of ourselves that it makes us uncomfortable, some symptom. But as we continue to practice, what we find more and more is that as we see through the symptom, we see that the underlying problem is deeper. And we begin to see that the underlying problem is also causing all kinds of other symptoms. And we stop being so concerned with the symptoms, and we start paying attention to what our cause is, what this fundamental issue is. And this is where our practice starts to take life, starts to become alive, because we begin to realize that regardless of what direction we've approached from, this fundamental question of who I am, where I come from, is at the very root of all of the symptoms. So paying attention, becoming aware, and...
Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.